Good afternoon, everybody. It's 1 o'clock, and welcome to the 9th Annual Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference. I'm Jamie Machuk with the Wisconsin Valley Library Service, and I'm moderating the marketing track today. This is our final session in this track, and assisting me is Jean Anderson with the South Central Library System, and we're so glad to have you here. Our presenter for this session, the final session in the marketing track, is Laura Solomon. Laura has presented for several conferences in the past. We were trying to figure out how many. She is the Library Services Manager for the Ohio Public Library Information Network, or OPLIN, out of Columbus, Ohio. And she's going to talk about emojis and the role they have in marketing. So Laura, take it away.
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everyone. I'm coming to you from snowy, south of Cleveland, I guess I would say today. And I'm happy to be with you. And today's session is one of the more fun ones that I get to do. And it was interesting listening to everyone mention what their favorite emoji is. And feel free to continue to share that. And the moderators here are going to kind of keep me keyed in, I think, to questions that come in. Is that right, Jamie and Jean?
Yes, we will.
Okay. So feel free to put those into the question box. I'm always interested in that sort of thing. It's actually a really good question, and there was quite a variety. My favorite actually is just the plain old smiley face, which in all of you are talking about much more esoteric things, made me feel kind of out of it. But I just noticed that's the one I use the most. I guess and that's one of the neat things I think about emoji is it does enable you to express a lot more personality than maybe we could otherwise. So I have a lot to talk about today, and feel free. And Jamie says dog footprints. I said heart of hugs. Oh, good. So keep talking about that. I'm going to keep one eye on the chat, so feel free to put stuff in there. I actually really like to engage with folks while I'm talking. I'm generally pretty good at interrupting myself and putting myself back on track. So don't feel like you're interrupting. If you have comments or questions, put those into the chat box. I'll keep one eye on that, and we can talk about things as they come up. I'm perfectly okay with that. So here's what we're going to cover in the short time that we have today. I've kind of broken things out mostly into 4 broad sections. First, I want to talk about really getting a foundation in emoji. And one of the things I found the more that I dug into emoji is that there's really a lot more to it and the cultural touch points that are associated with emoji than you might think. They really penetrated culture in such a major way. And some of you may have already experienced that, like Jamie was just mentioning her 10-year-old niece, who basically seems to respond primarily in emoji. So I want to talk about that a little bit because I think that going forward and using emoji in marketing without having a real understanding of how they're already in use and how they're perceived could be kind of a dangerous undertaking. So I want to spend a little time on some foundational information. I also want to talk about some psychological factors, again, kind of going back to understanding how they're used, how they're viewed, but some specific things geared to maybe more demographic information, especially we're going to cover in that section. And then, of course, the meat and potatoes, and probably the reason that many of you came is like, Laura, just tell us, should we use these for marketing or not? We are going to talk about that. And of course, the answer, I'll give you, this is the spoiler alert. The answer to that question is it depends, of course. So we're going to talk about on what those things depend. And we'll do a quick wrap up too. So if you have any questions, again, please feel free to, you do not have to wait until the end, although you're certainly welcome to. Go ahead and put those into the chat or the question box. And Jamie and Jean are going to keep me apprised of all of that. So let's start with that first section that I just mentioned in our agenda, getting a foundation in emoji. So one of the first things I want to talk about just a little bit is that there is an actual definition of emoji, and it comes from Unicode. I always start to say unicorn, and there is a unicorn emoji, but no, it's unicode.org, which is actually sort of the standard setting body for emoji. And some of you mentioned in the chat earlier that there's like Apple emojis and Facebook has custom emojis, and there certainly are things that are custom to certain platforms. But in terms of those that are standardized across the board, they come from unicode.org. And this is their official definition. They're pictographs that are typically presented in a colorful form and used inline in text. And I think that that's something kind of important to keep in the back of your mind, that used inline in text, because that's one of the things that actually sets them apart from other types of graphics, which are not used inline with your text. Think about how many like SMS or text messages that you've sent. And it's not only SMS or phone messages. I mean, we use these in emails all the time and other chat platforms. But the point being is that think about how many times you have finished up a sentence with, like for myself, a smiley face, or tears of joy emoji. Could be anything, right? And they do get broken up into some broad categories here, like it mentions: faces, weather, vehicles, buildings, plants, and animals. And there's a whole ton of these. I'm going to talk about some sources for these too near the end. So they represent a lot of different things. And we're going to talk about some of those meanings too. But one of the things that I want to clear up before we get too far into things is the idea of the emoticon versus an emoji. Because, for example, some chat interfaces, and GoToMeeting might actually be one of these. I'm not positive. I don't know if you can put emoji into GoToMeeting's chat, but I know I still use some chat interfaces in different products in my life that don't accept emoji. So instead, if I want to put a smiley face in, I put in a colon and a parenthesis. And Jean is showing another emoticon right there. And these are the predecessors. And there is a difference. They are not interchangeable, although sometimes you'll see the terms interchanged, but they really shouldn't be. So the emoji was actually predated by the emoticon, which is text-based because you can create it, obviously, with the characters on your keyboard. And there were attempts in the early 1990s, especially in Europe and Japan, to kind of enhance the basic emoticon and make it, frankly, more desirable, more interesting. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But so it really is an evolution. But what's interesting about this evolution is that while emoticons evolved into emoji, emoticons are still, as we can see here today, very much in use. They haven't gone away. So while it is an evolution, it didn't actually leave the former version of itself behind. So there is a difference here. To be aware of that when you're doing your marketing, that they are not the same thing. Now, it was one of the things Jamie said as we were discussing things early on before the session is, who doesn't love emoji? Well, as it turns out, there are a good number who actually do not love emoji. They've actually experienced their fair share of controversy. Some view them as one of the worst things to ever happen to communication, and others are convinced, like probably honestly many of us, at least based on our early conversation here, that it's not really all that deep. We should be able to simply bask in the joy of, these cute little digital icons without becoming seriously philosophical about it. So there is some controversy about this. This is one of my favorite memes, by the way, and maybe you've seen this. It's been around for a while. One of the biggest concerns with emojis is that they're potentially diluting the English language, or they're taking away from quote unquote normal communication. This is somewhat of a valid concern because it's true that these symbols are replacing a lot of our words. And with the breadth of emojis out there today, there's over 3,500 of them in the standardized Unicode standard alone. So there's a lot. That doesn't include all the custom ones. So they are potentially replacing a lot of words, and with so many of them, you could basically have a whole text conversation just using pictures, using emoji. So it's not weird that some people may miss using actual words to convey how they feel, but something that most people with this type of concern probably fail to realize is that language, especially the English language, is always evolving. Although they're basically internet slang for all practical purposes. And they, of course, can be kind of silly, and many of us probably use them in silly ways. They're an addition to the English language. Excuse me, losing my voice today. And so it's something that makes communication easier. So the notion that emojis are a step back for literacy it's a little bit elitist because again, this is an evolution, and you have to think of this. We've been using emoticons forever, and people didn't freak out then, but as soon as they became much more colorful and much more cutesy, then people started to kind of sit up and take notice and get a little freaked out. I love this quote from Vivian Evans. She wrote a book called The Emoji Code. And she says, to assert that emoji will make us poor communicators is like saying that using facial expressions in conversation makes your ideas more difficult to understand. The idea is nonsensical. And I agree completely. And I am a user of emoji, by the way. I don't use it like Jamie's 10-year-old niece, not even like my 16-year-old teenage son. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those demographic differences, but I don't have any issues with emoji because very much like Evans, I feel like emoji help me to add expression to what I'm saying. Now, one of the things, sorry folks, it's that time of year up here in Northern Ohio. I mentioned generational differences already, and this is something that will continue to pop up with emoji, especially because there's so much of a difference between, younger people using them and significantly older users, how they use them or don't use them. But another common concern is that sometimes emoji are hard to judge. You've probably all seen the eggplant emoji, right? That's probably the most famous, or maybe I should say infamous one, because the eggplant emoji almost always does not mean actually eggplant. It has a lot of sexual connotations to it. And the other thing is what one emoji means to you might not mean the same to another person. This can create a misunderstanding, and this is especially evident between generations. A recent trend among Gen Z TikTok users, like my son, for example, huge user on TikTok and other social media and texting, all that, is they will use the fairy emoji or the sparkle emoji when they're actually, you would look at those and think, oh, it's cute, it's pretty, it's sparkly. That's not actually what it means. According to one article I had read just when I was doing some casual research, it means that they're being sarcastic. And so I thought, well, is this true? So I immediately, of course, went to my son and I said, hey, if somebody puts a fairy or a sparkle with their text or on a TikTok, what do you think they're saying? I mean, what does that mean? He's like, oh yeah, they're being really sarcastic. So I mean, this is a thing. It doesn't mean what I would have thought, which is cute, pretty, something like that. And with that generation, it means something else entirely. And often it's included with often a passive aggressive comment. And they're not actually posted with the actual intention of being mean. They're just kind of used for humorous effect. And Jamie asked, does anyone care to share a story in the question area of when you misunderstood an emoji? Oh, that would be fabulous. Thank you, Jamie. That's a really good question. When you jokingly, so Jamie asked me a question to which I do not know the answer. She said, is it true that the poo emoji was actually created as a chocolate emoji? I don't know, Jamie, but at the end I will have a source where you can look it up. How's that? I'm a good librarian. I can't tell you the answer, but I can tell you where to go. So it's an interesting question. So, they're not intending to be mean. To just go back to the fairies and the sparkles, it's more of a joking, you're my friend, hey, I'm being sarcastic kind of thing. They still like each other at the end of the day, but you try to explain this to someone sometimes who is even younger than me. I won't tell you how old I am, but I'm definitely older than my son. And sometimes there's chaos because it's like, wait a minute, what? On the flip side, while emojis can create conflict, they can also clear things up because these symbols are not just purely emotional. They can add layers of complexity and clarity to communication, according to psychologist Linda Kay, who authored a study on the role of emoji in human behavior. So this is why emojis sometimes get kind of messy when we talk about using them, because as we saw with the eggplant, with the sparkles and the fairies, just as a couple examples, they can help with communication, but there's also an assumption that the person who is receiving the communication understands the purpose of that emoji. So that's kind of one of the hangups we have to be concerned with. Emojis, though, they aren't going anywhere. Probably all of us here have used them at least once, if not every single day. And whether you view that as a good thing or a bad thing, they're going to continue to evolve as a language. And they're special in the sense that they've given the world these nonverbal signals to interpret a conversation's meaning. And in that way, they really kind of transcend language, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. So one of the things I kind of want you to focus on after you leave here today is the idea that yes, emojis can add a lot of meaning. You just got to make sure you're adding the right meaning for the right audience. Now, one of the questions that sometimes come up is, where did the word emoji actually come from? And there's a couple different explanations for this, but they tend to center around this idea. So you may not see a lot of consistency if you go researching this for yourself. But generally speaking, the word emoji comes from Japanese. It comes from which means is a picture, mo, write, and ji, which is character, so a picture written character. And Japanese characters, or kanji, are largely based on Chinese ideograms, meaning the language's writing system is already highly pictorial. So for at least the Japanese, this was not a huge jump, because they're already used to this kind of idea. Maybe that's one of the reasons that we have a harder time with it in the United States than maybe they do in some other cultures and countries. When did they first appear? So they actually, it seems like they've been around forever, but not quite forever. They actually were first created in 1999. It was a Japanese artist, and I know I'm going to mess up this poor person's name, Shigetaka Kurita. I hope I said that right. Basically, the idea was he wanted to convey information in a quick, easy way. And they were created for a very specific purpose, which was ease of communication on a brand new mobile internet system that was developed by a Japanese telecom. So their system offered emails, but they were restricted at that time to only 250 characters. So emoji were a way to say more in this limited amount of space that they had. And Kurita, who was only 25 years old at the time, he had to work within several limitations, probably the biggest of which is that he only had 144 pixel resolution to work with, which today we look back and go, oh my gosh, it's not quite 8-bit graphics, but it's getting there. Which is why the original emoji looks so blocky compared to modern ones. If you ever see older digital communications, their emoji don't look quite so polished as the ones that we see, like, for example, on the screen right here, or probably the ones anywhere today. Now, today, emojis are often created with vector graphics. So if you don't know the difference between raster and a vector, here's a real quick lesson. Vector graphics basically are created with math, and they scale up or down in size without any loss of quality. Unlike things that you create, like, for example, Photoshop, where often if you blow it up really big, things become very pixelated. Emoji now are very polished. They're created with vectors, and you can scale them to just about any size without any loss in quality. So I mentioned the Unicode organization. I keep saying unicorn. It should be unicorn, darn it. Unicode organization. This is actually the organization. It's overseen by something called the Unicode Consortium. And it was already the international standard for text representation. It has been since the very early 90s. But they didn't really want to be involved, interestingly enough, with emoji. And it wasn't until we have Google to thank, by the way, because Google employees requested that Unicode look into the possibility of a uniform emoji set. And then once Google got in there, other companies quickly followed suit because, of course, they didn't want to be left behind. So we started seeing, for example, Apple, and also other providers in Europe and Japan. And so Unicode said, okay, we've got all these big players now. We need to do something about this. And sort of by default, they became kind of the managers of the mainstream emoji set. Previously, it had been out of their bailiwick, so to speak, and they didn't want to deal with it. But Google, of course, overlord of all the internet, once they got involved, things started to move. Now, one of the things you may have already noticed, even as I've been talking, is that I have already interchanged emoji and emojis. The question then comes up, right? What's the actual plural? And I hate to tell you this, but there isn't actually a definitive answer to this question. even the emoji subcommittee, which is part of Unicode, they use emoji as the plural form, but it doesn't really seem to have taken off necessarily anywhere. Well, I don't know about anywhere else, but many other places. For example, the Atlantic, the New York Times, they will regularly mix the two. Even I have mixed the two here today, and will continue to do that. And it's perfectly okay because there really isn't a set standard. So don't be confused when you see emoji or emojis. Emoji is the Japanese word, and we've kind of stuck an English S on the end to pluralize it, but either one will work just fine. Not a big deal. So of course these are only getting more popular. It's not going to go down anytime soon. More than 90% of social media users use them to communicate, and over 6 billion emojis are being exchanged every single day. That kind of blew my mind. So more than 90% of people on social media use these, and 6 billion every day. Wow. For the most part, they've become a modern day, mostly universal language. I don't know if I would go and say universal. I think it depends on the emoji myself. But no matter what your background or your culture or your religion or your language is, everyone understands the meaning of a smiley face. That's probably one of the few emojis that doesn't get confused, right? And I mentioned before some kind of cultural touch points, and I want to share a couple of those today to give you an idea of just how far emojis have come. You may not have known this, but there is actually a copy of Moby Dick that has been written entirely in emojis. In 2009, a man named Fred Benenson, he started up a Kickstarter to help him raise money so he could compile an emoji-only translation of Herman Melville's Moby Dick. And you can actually still buy it there, emojidick.com, if you want to. He succeeded. He raised just under $4,000, and you can still buy a copy of this. I don't know if you want to, other than for the novelty factor. It sure would be interesting to try to figure out. Probably most or all of us here are familiar with pop star Katy Perry, although you may not have seen the music video for her song Roar that came out in 2013. And the entire video you're looking at a screenshot of pretty much what it is. It's done entirely, all the lyrics are done entirely through emojis. So I'm going to give you a second just to look at this. And of course, if you already know the lyrics, this might be easier to figure out. And I'm going to show you what the actual English lyrics are. Here we go. So you can take a moment to kind of see how they transliterated the English to the emoji/English. And they did this for the entire video. The entire video looks like a text conversation done in a lot of emojis. It's really kind of an interesting concept. Also, they've made it to high fashion. In 2016, Karl Lagerfeld used a lot of emojis in his line. There were bangles with the cat emoji. Apparently he has a favorite cat, so that was a big thing for him. Belts that had victory hands, jackets with peace signs, thumbs up symbols and flowers. Of course, the Chanel logo's in there somewhere too, and most of these things. But it shows you just how mainstream these had already become by that time. And just moving forward in time, some of you may remember, I didn't actually see this movie, kind of past the age of that I'd be interested in, and my son too is a little old for it probably. But the Emoji movie came out in 2017. I don't know if anybody here saw it and what they thought of it, but just the idea that they could make a whole animated movie based on the idea of emojis, they've come a long way. And this, again, was almost 4 years ago. So they obviously entered the mainstream consciousness by that time. One of the other interesting things that started to happen is the idea of putting emojis on license plates. Now, unfortunately, this has not happened in the US, although there have been attempts to do this both in Vermont and it's either Washington State or California. I'm sorry, I can't remember. There are 2 states. I know Vermont was one of them. And this was actually from Queensland, Australia, where it actually has been done, that you can choose from 5 different emojis, 3 of which are pictured there. Sorry, the poop emoji is not one of them. Remember, there's over 3,500 of them just in the common lexicon, but only 3 or 5 of them can be on a Queensland license plate. but it's an interesting way for them to make more money. And of course, people want these. They've been fairly popular. So they still have to have some letters and numbers on them. They can't be just an emoji. But it's a really interesting idea. Now, it was also interesting to me when we were talking earlier about favorite emoji. How many folks said that they use the tear? It's called the tears of joy emoji. It's the smiley face. It looks like someone laughing and they have tears coming out of their eye. That actually is the most popular emoji in the world. But if you want to know what the most commonly used emoji at any given time on Twitter is, you're going to want to check out this. This is actually an animated screenshot. This is Emojitracker.com. You're not seeing this in live time. This is just a screen capture of a few moments from Emojitracker. And what it shows is basically how many times a particular emoji is being used on Twitter in real time. It's fascinating to watch. And the tears of joy emoji virtually always stays in that first spot at the top left. But if you kind of want to get an idea of the zeitgeist of what's happening on Twitter, looking at this is going to give you a pretty solid idea of how people are feeling at the moment and how many times something is being used. So if you're kind of want to see what the most popular ones are, this is a good place to start. Now, one of the things that's kind of happened with not necessarily the advent of emoji, but maybe the more mainstream adoption of emoji, is that online communication has become increasingly shorter because of the use of emoji, and also internet slang is changing as a result. So common abbreviations like LOL aren't used nearly as often. In fact, I've been told, my son has told me, like, oh, that's old. Using LOL is old. So again, not all chat interfaces or platforms necessarily support emoji. So in which case, you can't use a laughing emoji, but in which case you obviously have to use LOL. But it's not something that we see nearly as often. Emoji has replaced internet slang in a lot of social media online. So it's not completely gone, but I do have to constantly remind myself that LOL is something that old people say. So we have to think of emoji not as a replacement. It's a creative form of language that better helps us to express ourselves, maybe more imaginatively. Think of it as a complement rather than a replacement. And emojis serve this important role. They don't just replace words, they add to words. And remember, emojis were created as a symbolic representation of emotions. And so they're kind of similar to punctuation. They're used to express emotion, irony, or humor, or sadness, or whatever, and to substitute body language because we can't show body language in online communication. So this can help us with not only body language and nonverbal cues, but our tone. And for many of us, that's how we use these, and that's how they're going to probably be continued to use. So I want to talk just quickly about some of the psychological factors to think about when you're using emoji, now that you have a pretty good idea of where they've been, where they are now. So the very first thing I want to talk about is this particular study. It found that people are more agreeable, or people who use more emoji are viewed as being more agreeable on social media platforms. Agreeableness is a personality trait that correlates with better communication in the real world too. Agreeable people smile more, they use more encouraging words when they're talking with other people. So the more emojis that you use, the more agreeable you may appear. Now, does that mean you should load up every piece of marketing with tons of emoji? Well, no. We're going to talk about that. But it's kind of important to know that, yes, emojis can kind of make your library look more friendly, maybe would be a good way to put it. There's also an interesting link, a strong one, between social power and emojis. Influential social media users put more emojis, especially more positive emojis, so probably fewer poop icons, right, in their posts than what you might see as a low status or non-influencer user. And I know, just cruising through Instagram, cruising through TikTok, that's something that I tend to see, is emojis are used strongly by a lot of influencers or celebrities, I guess you could also say. And I see a comment come in. Jamie says, my mother-in-law thought LOL meant lots of love, not laugh out loud, and was using it on people with cancer treatments. Oh dear. Talk about a generation gap. We took care of that with her pretty quickly. Yeah, well, and now she, I have actually heard that before, although I'm sorry she used it with someone with cancer treatments, but that is a common misunderstanding of LOL, actually. So it's not just emojis; it's also other acronyms that can be confused. That's a good story. So if you're looking, I guess the marketing lesson here when we talk about this link between being an influencer and using emoji is that if you want your library to be more influential, using more emoji may push you in that direction. Will it make you an influencer on a given platform? No, of course not. But it is going to at least get your library viewed more favorably. Gender also influences emoji use, which is probably not a big surprise because I know that when I look at texts, for example, that I get from my husband or even my son or any male friends, they do not have as many emoji as ones from my female friends or relatives. I'm not sure, I'm not sure what the cultural reason for that is, but I can see that at least in my own life play out. So various studies have shown that women use these more often than men. Females tend to see graphic symbols as more enriching for communication.
Okay, did we lose her audio or is that just me?
Nope, I'm not hearing her either.
Okay. Let me send her text message.
Yes, thanks for letting us know. Hopefully you're hearing Jamie and I. Are you hearing for those? Okay, good. Yeah, so we're checking with Laura to see what happened. So give us just a moment to see if we can fix that. And we lost her right on the word enriching communication. Yes, that was quite ironic.
Okay, GoToMeeting just hung up on me. All of a sudden I had a disconnect signal. What the? Okay, sorry folks. GoToMeeting doesn't like me today. So I'm not sure where I got cut off.
We lost you when you were saying the word enriching communication, which is ironic.
Okay. Thanks, GoToMeeting. Okay. Well, anyway, moving on from that. So thank you for catching me up there. So women use emoji in more varied contexts, often to express humor more so than men. And men or males mostly use them for sarcasm and teasing. I think we could discuss the cultural implications of that for a while, but we won't. But just to be aware of just some of the gender factors, because if you're targeting your marketing towards a particular gender, that's something you're going to want to be aware of too. This next thing was kind of interesting to me about some of the real world applications of emoji, I mean, outside of marketing. There's a free mental health support service. It's called the Crisis Text Line. Maybe you're familiar with it. It's been around since 2013. And they focus a lot on using data to kind of figure out how to better serve people, obviously, who are in crisis. And unlike helplines that offer assistance based on the order in which the users dialed in or messaged or texted, Crisis Text Line has an algorithm that determines who is the most urgent, has the most urgent need of counseling. And we're interested in learning which emoji and words texters use when their suicide risk is high, because they obviously want to quickly connect them with someone who can help them. So they did an analysis of 129 million messages that were processed by them between 2013 and the end of 2019. And they found that the pill emoji, that yellow and red pill, was 4.4 times more likely to end in a life-threatening situation than the actual text of the word suicide. I thought that was really interesting. So people who are more likely to harm themselves actually use this emoji far more than people who simply write out the word suicide. Something else to be aware of, especially as marketers with emojis, is the fact that there is, again, this goes back to some of the controversy, but this is something that we're seeing in all kinds of spheres in terms of messaging. And I encourage you, when you get the recording of this, to take a look at this full presentation. It's only 10 slides long, and I have one full slide right here. So, you know, emojis can reveal some surprisingly complex ideas about default whiteness and the ways that we pretend that certain things are colorblind. So, you know, we have to be really careful when we start choosing colors for emojis, because I'm sure most or all of you know, many emojis have different skin tones available that you can choose from, you know, hands, people, shrugging, all kinds of things. You know, and it brings up a lot of questions. Like on Slack, like I use Slack at work with all my coworkers. You know, if a black colleague uses a black thumbs up emoji to react to someone's comment, is it weird as a white person to also tap that black thumbs up to show your support? You know, if you're a white person, is it better to use the Simpsons neutral, but it's actually white? You know, thumbs up. You know, if you use a lighter skin emoji, it might look like white power moves. So what do you do? And the answers aren't easy. And I encourage you to look at this presentation again. This is 1 out of 10 slides right here. And just to bring up your own level of awareness, especially because I know that one of the sessions that preceded mine today talked about inclusivity, which I think is a really important thing in libraries. And I think this really ties into that idea. And we need to be aware of, you know, if you're using an emoji that is not a person, you know, if you're using you know, you wouldn't probably use an eggplant, but, you know, if you're using a birthday cake, it obviously doesn't have skin color. But when you are start using things that are related directly to people or parts of people, this is an important concept to be aware of. All right, so now we're down to that meat and potatoes part that I mentioned earlier, and I know that all of you have been hanging on to, although hopefully you've also gotten some things to chew on from some of the earlier pieces, so you start thinking a little more carefully about how you use or don't use emoji. So should you use emoji for marketing? And I already gave you the spoiler alert. It depends, right? It depends. This is probably not a surprise to anyone who's in marketing. Humans are visual creatures, and our brains easily understand images. And you've probably heard this a million times, that people remember 10% of what they hear, 20% of what they read, but 80% of what they see. So the more visual that your marketing message can be, the more likely it is to have a lasting impact that can benefit your library. So emojis are an easy nonverbal cue that is visual that you can include in your messaging. And one study by the International Communication Association looked at the effect that emojis have on information processing. The study looked at differing responses to, they put a couple different experts into a chat room. They put in a film critic and a doctor. And they wanted to see the responses to them when they used or didn't use emoji. And it turned out that the presence of emojis does affect cognition and attention. Chat room users had a significantly better memory of the chat conversations, which included emojis, which is interesting when you think about it. Like, I don't know, would I feel comfortable if my doctor were using emoji? Well, apparently a lot of people are, and they feel better when the doctor is using emoji. Film critic, I don't know that I would have a strong feeling either way. A doctor, I would be a little more leery of, but the data shows us that people remember it better and they process it better. They also, as far as first impressions went, the users also considered both experts, the film critic and the doctor, more friendly and competent when they both used emoji. So again, this kind of goes back to that psychological factor that I referred to earlier, the idea that people seem more agreeable when they use more emoji. Apparently, this also plays out in terms of how people not just view the message, but also can remember and process the message, which is really, I think, good for us as marketers. So research has also found that when we as human beings look at a smiling face online, the same parts of the brain are stimulated as when we look at a human face. So they actually show a real effect on us as human beings. Our brain behaves in the same way when we look at an emoji as we do as when we look at a human face. So that smiley face that I use all the time is, as far as someone's brain is concerned who's receiving my message, is the same thing as my smiling face. They're getting the same reaction to it. Your brain considers emojis and emoticons, by the way, to be equivalent to the human face by your brain. And that's really much of the reason why emoji user engagement is more than what you'll see with text or any other type of content, because our brains are reacting directly to those emoji, especially the ones that express emotion in that way. So here's the stats. Here are the ones, right, that you're going to take home and tuck under your pillow. So can you get more engagement with emoji? And the basic answer is absolutely, especially in social media. From a marketing standpoint, emojis are undeniably useful. Emojis in a tweet can increase your engagement by more than 25%. And Jamie says, so Facebook uses a blue thumbs up. Maybe the other platforms could just get purple or green. That's an idea. I would love to actually personally, just to interrupt myself, love to see the emoji reactions from Facebook go to a few other platforms. It's very limiting now not to have those. So yeah, I'm with you. And maybe, I don't know, maybe they could all be the same color. I don't care. It'd be nice just to have a thumbs up. That's a good idea, Jamie. So Twitter absolutely can increase your engagement. Facebook, there's a range, but it's all positive. So Facebook post with emojis in it can increase the number of likes. A little bit different pieces here. Can increase the number of likes by up to 57%, which is huge, and the number of comments and shares by up to 33%. And Instagram, I almost forgot Instagram. I don't have stats for other ones, but I suspect it might be similar. Instagram up to 48% more engagement. And, you know, if emojis can so drastically increase the likelihood of engagement, there's no reason you shouldn't be using them as an overall idea. When it comes to email, it gets a little messier than social media. Social media, it's a clear win. Emoji, yay, absolutely go do it. With email, it gets a little more into the world of it depends. So there's kind of a lot here, and some of it's contradictory. So let me start off with adding an emoji to an email subject line. Now let's be clear about that. The subject line, not the body, but adding it to the subject line increases the negative sentiment towards that email by 26%. Negative sentiment. In other words, there's some evidence that emails without emojis are actually perceived as more valuable. There's, interestingly enough, though, the same study found there's no real significant difference in how people rated the trustworthiness of emails with or without emojis, which kind of surprised me, because I would have thought that, like, oh, tons of emojis in the subject line is a scam. But they actually don't care so much about the trustworthiness. They're just an overall negative feeling, potentially, towards emojis in the subject line. And I do a regular kind of a newsletter thing at my state agency for clients of one of our services. And I had recently started experimenting with emoji in the subject line before I saw this study. And I didn't get a real good feel from using it that it was making any difference. And so what I did is I started taking them out. And what was interesting is that I started getting more responses once I started taking them out of the subject line. I'll still pop them in every once in a while to kind of experiment, but just for my own very anecdotal take on this, this has kind of matched my experience. One of the interesting things, though, and why I say this is contradictory, is that emails with emojis are actually somewhat more likely to be selected for opening. So this is kind of it is a contradictory set of findings, right? Because on the one hand, it's like, oh, potentially people will look more negatively on my email because it has an emoji in the subject line, but they're more likely to open it. What sense does that make? I don't know. But we have to remember that, even though their attention may be driven to opening it, people don't like to feel manipulated. It's possible that the blatant use of meaningless imagery for the whole purpose of making email stand out is perceived as a gimmick. That might be where this is coming from. It doesn't quite explain, at least to me, why they get open more. So I guess kind of the long and short of this, at least my feelings on it, is that be very careful using them in your subject lines. There seems to be a lot more play in terms of using them in the body of an email, but using them in the subject line may not be a good idea, or at least be very careful with it. So, in fact, emojis and subject lines have been proven to work, and I'm putting the word work in quotes, about 60% of the time, meaning they boost open rates by about 25%. But when they don't work, here's the downside of this, they actually hurt open rates by that same amount. So you have to be really careful. Use them sparingly in your subject lines. If you're going to use them at all, use it sparingly. One other thing to kind of tie into using them in your emails, whether it's subject line, whether it's body, is don't use emojis in your emails if they're not also in use on your social media and your other digital marketing efforts, because emojis are more natural in email communication. If your audience has already seen them elsewhere, it's part of your voice as an organization. If you're only using them in email or only using them in social media, it's kind of like you're expressing yourself emotionally in only one place and not anywhere else. And it's kind of a weird look. So I encourage you to, if you're going to use them consistently. And that doesn't mean, though, to put them absolutely everywhere. As of September of last year, there's more than 3,500 emojis in the Unicode standard. Again, not including custom ones. So it can be really easy to just kind of start tossing these out everywhere. So I want to just share some tips to use them appropriately and use them well. You don't want to use them just to be trendy and just because Laura said so. You do want to consider if using emojis is right for your library and especially for your audience. We already talked a little bit about, the age gap in some cases. While most millennials prefer to express emotion through emojis, only 37% of people over 65 feel this way. So if you're targeting a young demographic and you're trying to be fun or quirky, then emoji marketing is an obvious way to boost your engagement. But if your message is trying to target older people, or of course deal with very serious topics, right? You're not going to use emojis for, Holocaust Awareness Day. At least I hope you won't. They may not portray the right tone for your library to be using. So you have to be very cognizant of the audience. Don't just use them because they're on trend. Know who you're aiming the message at and who's going to be receiving it. Because the older the person is, the less likely it is that they're going to appreciate it or even understand it. You can go overboard. This is kind of an infamous tweet from 2015 from Goldman Sachs. It's still used to this day as an example, and I'm using it today this way, as an example of what not to do. We have to be really careful not to get carried away and use too many. Obviously, Goldman Sachs thought they were being really cool because they were talking about millennial stuff. Emojis are used to convey what words can't, but going overboard is going to make it look forced and, kind of like, hey, kids, here I am. I've got my baseball cap and my skateboard, but I'm really an adult in disguise. It also is very confusing. The entire gist of this message was probably lost because there's just so many darn emojis. So, it's tough for the audience to decode this message. We talked about alternate meanings early on. This one is something else. And like I said, I'm going to give you a couple of resources so you can look these up before you start using them if you're not very familiar with them. You may have seen this. It's a person tipping hand. It was actually originally created, and I think as library folks, we really appreciate this name. It was originally called the information desk person. And so when you see that, your first instinct might be, oh, library, we have an information desk. I should be absolutely using this emoji. However, you keep reading down, this emoji is commonly used to express sassiness or sarcasm. So while this may, and part of that is because sometimes it looks like someone is flipping his or her hair. So there, again, a meaning you might not think, even from the original name, which is why it's important to look these up before you start using them if you're not entirely familiar with these. So to conclude, and this includes some sources for you to look at, by the way, for libraries that are using emojis, they're used in conversations, whether social media or email or anywhere, can reveal your library sentiment and build awareness of what you're doing, and of course increase engagement for the most part. But most importantly, emoji in your marketing can express emotion to your audience in a fun way. Again, being aware of who the audience is for the message. This may not be appropriate for every demographic that you're attempting to target. Now, some resources that I've alluded to several times already, I want to share with you. The first one is probably my favorite, and this is the Emojipedia, which is simply emojipedia.org. It's the ultimate encyclopedia of emoji and includes pretty much every possible emoji. It short codes, its brief history, even how it looks on various operating systems, and you can get those alternate meanings that, like for example, the information desk person that isn't really the information desk person anymore, and also ranks the current most popular emojis and also has emoji news. So it really does kind of earn its moniker of the Emojipedia. It does have a lot. The next one is Emojisaurus, and this is kind of a different thing. What it does is it turns phrases and sentence into what it calls emojigrams. So if you wanted to post an emoji sentence to your followers to try to decode as a fun thing, this is a place where you can grab some of those as just a fun social media activity. And then Getemoji is similar to the Emojipedia in that you can find emojis to copy and paste. And all of them work on iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows. They can be copied pretty much everywhere. And I think Emojipedia mostly can too. This is kind of, if you don't feel like using an emoji keyboard on your device, this is a great tool to bookmark. So if you're working primarily in mobile, this is maybe where Getemoji might work a little bit better for you than Emojipedia. So I just wanted to include that. And I wanted to finish up with just a fun little exercise. I'm going to give you some emojigrams, I guess we'll call them. So, and I want you to see if you can interpret them. Here's the first one. You're going to just put your answer, if you wouldn't mind, into the chat. What is this? 4 barbershop poles.
Right. So put your response in the question box, please. I'm seeing a barbershop thing. Barbershop quartet.
Yep.
Okay.
They got it. This is one of the easier ones.
All right. All right.
Good job. This is a barbershop quartet. Probably not something you use very often, to be honest, in your marketing, unless you have a show coming up, in which case your demographic probably isn't going to be the folks looking for this. But I thought it was a fun way to just kind of gently ease into this. Now we're going to up the difficulty level a little bit. What's this?
All right. Any guesses? It looks like a dog. Bark up the wrong
This is an
tree.
expression.
Don't
say that again.
Bark up the wrong tree.
Yep. Barking up the wrong tree. Good job.
Good job.
All right. Increasing the difficulty level a little bit more, although maybe not that much more.
BB reverse. I'm terrible at these. To be or not to be?
Yep. Yeah, this one wasn't that hard because the 2 B's kind of gives it away.
Yeah.
So to be or not to be. So you might want to take a moment and kind of look at how they got to that, because the 2 B's are actually the easy part. The rest of it takes a little more interpretation. And one last one. This is harder.
All right, so it's either a sunrise or a sunset. Plus sunrise. I'm not even going to try because my brain is fried. Early to bed, early to rise. Early to bed and early to rise makes a person wealthy and wise.
Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise.
Okay. So are the arrows, does that mean or?
It usually means they're open to a little bit of interpretation, and this is where I would say go to Emojipedia. But when we saw, if I can go back here, to be or not to be results in kind of is here's probably the easiest, barking up. So in this case, the arrow is used literally to mean the word up.
Barking up, yeah.
But you can see here that we have these sideways arrows that kind of are used more in the context of result.
Okay.
Result in or makes. So there's definitely some interpretation here. So that's why I rely heavily on Emojipedia for getting things right, because there's definitely a spectrum for some of these things. But these might be fun exercises for you to use for your patrons, just for the heck of it. So hopefully I've given you some things to think about when you go forth and you use emoji, and hopefully you've learned some fun facts in case you're ever on Emoji Jeopardy. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have or thoughts that I didn't get to.
So we do have a few minutes. If you do have a question for Laura, please submit it in the question box. One of them is, do you think the work culture is changing, making it more acceptable for use in email? It seems like it was frowned upon in the early years or seemingly unprofessional.
I can give you my very biased take on that. I think, I think that the general answer is yes. And as we continue to see younger folks continue to, come into the workforce, you're going to see more of that loosening of the strings, so to speak. But it also depends on where you work. For example, my husband works at a bank. There are no emojis. So
right.
So I think it's a cultural thing too, along with being an age thing, and maybe even the banks will loosen up as more millennials come to working in banks, and Gen Z. So that's my take on it. Whether that, again, bias. I don't have a lot of facts to back that up, but it seems to me, yes, that things are loosening up in general, particularly in libraries. We have a lot more latitude than someone in some kinds of organizations or business places.
I would still say by default, it's better to use your words instead of emojis, or even I know this isn't part of it, but exclamation points. I know you've talked about exclamation points as well, Laura, and the overuse sometimes in library marketing. Yeah, of course. In the banking profession, you're not gonna, hey, you bounced a check, smiley face. So there was someone said, I would say as a hiring director, I frown upon the use of emojis when I'm emailing with prospective employees. So, okay. Yeah.
And that makes sense to me. Maybe once you're an employee, you get to use an emoji, but as someone doing the hiring, I wouldn't expect to see that anywhere.
I have a question related to not emojis, but why your website is titled Mean Laura? And I think you told me that one time.
Okay, so
she's
here's
not
the thing.
She's not a mean person.
I joke that I'm mean, but thank you. I'm not. That's not actually where it came from. So the full title of the site is "What Does This Mean to Me, Laura?" And when I first started that up, because I do it on behalf of my workplace, my director of the agency at the time said, "Well, you should just buy meanlaura.com, make it short." So I did. So that's why.
We have one more question, and then we'll finish. Can you elaborate more on your comment at the beginning of the presentation that emojis should be in text and not before or after the sentence?
They can be before or after the sentence. So when I mean in line, so trying to think of a good way to explain this. So when we talk about something in line, they're generally used as punctuation. So they tend to be used more after a sentence or even alone, but they don't have to be. The point is that they're often, when we say in line, it's usually in combination with some text. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does. Thank you. Well, thank you, Laura, for this great presentation and all of this information on emojis and marketing. As mentioned, the session recording and slides will be posted on our conference website by tomorrow. There will also be a short survey that will appear on your screen when we end. You'll also get it in your email. You only have to do the survey once. You don't have to do it twice, but either way, we appreciate your feedback. Our next session, our closing session for the conference is at 2:30. And we have Beck Tench talking about staying true to yourself in times of stress. So I hope to see many of you there. If not, that's all right too. I hope you have a great rest of your day. So long.